Approximately 30% of U.S. adults experience joint stiffness, and about 50% of adults over 75 report it daily. We're often told stiffness is simply due to osteoarthritis or wear and tear, but stiffness does not automatically mean arthritis is the root cause. Nearly 53 million Americans are given an arthritis diagnosis, yet many of them still do not get relief because the real source of stiffness might be missed. Research shows that joint stiffness can increase your risk of disability as you age. But here's the good news. There are 3 common and reversible causes of stiffness that we see every day in our clinic. When addressed correctly, people often feel dramatically younger, move easier, and avoid the decline. Unfortunately, our healthcare system tends to reinforce the message that stiffness is something you just have to live with. We hear it all the time. You're getting older, slow down. This is normal. Arthritis is the reason. This leaves people feeling discouraged and fearful of their future mobility. But this does not have to be your story. We help clients of all ages who thought stiffness was a permanent feel loose, strong, and confident again. There are 3 main sources of stiffness, and each has a different solution. So the first one is when you have joint stiffness, it will create stiffness in the body. But this is not something that you have to be like, oh my gosh, this is the end all be it all. When we see people that have joint stiffness, that happens from us doing repeated positions, repeated things over and over and over again. And when we do like one motion, I mean, what do we do throughout the day? We're sitting, we stand, we're always moving in this one plane, and we're never moving the joints in a lot of different directions. And so kind of what I described is like if you keep on pulling your finger back and it's only being pulled back in one direction day after day, year after year, this is going to create issues within the joint because the joint's meant to be in all these different directions, and it will produce joint stiffness. So we've got to address the joint stiffness. Now you might think, oh great, I'm going to go to a chiropractor because it's a joint issue. The problem is when the joint is so stiff you can't get a manipulation, and in reality, if you just do joint stretches in specific directions, it opens everything else up, and it's trying to figure out, well, what's that direction? And that's where coming in for an evaluation is key. Now, if we can figure out like, okay, if there's joint stiffness in this area, we've got to look at a lot of different areas. So like for instance, when we have someone that comes in and they have back pain, we're looking at joint stiffness. Is there joint stiffness in the back? Is there joint stiffness in the thoracic spine? Is there joint stiffness in the hip? Now you can have joint stiffness in the hip or the hip is not moving, but it's coming from the back. And as soon as we get the back moving, then the joint in the hip starts moving as well. So you've got to figure out like what's going on. But if your joints don't move and you start moving, you're going to be like, oh man, I feel like I'm 80 years old. I can't move. You also have issues when your joints are stiff that you have fearful, like people are fearful of moving. So if I'm fearful of moving because something's stiff, like for instance, I'm fearful of moving backwards because my back is stiff and I might be doing harm, when in reality, it might be the right direction to go. It might not be the right direction to go, but it might be the right direction to go into. But we're so fearful of moving that we just stop moving. And when we stop moving, guess what happens? As soon as you move the wrong way, boom, you start hurting. So you're fearful of, if I go and I step the wrong way, am I going to hurt? So I want to stay in my little box. When you get those joints moving, you also don't have those tendencies to, if I move the wrong way, then I'm going to hurt myself because something's going to spasm. You know, we had a client that came in and he literally was told he needed to sleep in a recliner because he couldn't lie flat because his back was so stiff. He could not lie flat on his bed to be able to sleep because he hurt. So he just stayed in the recliner. So he's giving in to the motion that is not allowing him to go flat. So he eventually will start looking like this because no one's ever working on stretching him out in a way that is safe, that gets the body to start moving. And so we're like, no, we're gonna get you sleeping in the bed. So we showed him some joint mobilizations that he can do, self-joint stretches that he can do using towel rolls. We've shown you many videos that we show you what we do. We basically are placing towel rolls up and down his spine, And in about 6 weeks, he was able to lie flat on his bed again. But he was giving in to the joint stiffness, and the doctors were feeding him the story of like, well, you know, this is just arthritis and this is just the way you have to live. But he never had to live that way. This is one story. I could tell you 100 stories of people in the same situation. So if we can improve that joint stiffness by doing joint stretches in specific directions that open things up, you will improve tremendously. Even when people have stenosis, we can start, if we can improve their mobility by this much, their function improves by this much. So that's the number one thing. We help people all the time improve their joint stiffness. So number two is when you can have muscle tightness, like muscle tightness that's clamped down around the joint. And so when this happens, you know, it creates a lot of joint stiffness. But we've got to, again, first rule out, is the joint moving? Is it, if it's not moving, we've got to address that first. And then whatever has shortened, because it's been like that for a long time, you'll get muscle protection around the joint that will shorten because it's been protecting. And so if we can reduce that shortening, once we got the joint moving, the shortening will also make you feel stiff and tight. And we've had people that literally, like, they just had shortening from overuse and things have like gotten tight around the joint, and we were able to release it, work on the compensation patterns, and they were back to feeling great again. But if you have tissue shortening, it will also make you feel like you have arthritis. This is so common in the knees. We see it in the knees all the time. And once we are able to release a lot of the tightness around that quad, everything starts feeling better in the knees, start moving, it start opening up. A lot of times the lateral quad is another part that gets so tight. That happens because of weakness in the hips, and you're compensating using different muscles that you shouldn't be using. And so these are all things that can be solved. Fingers are another one. People say, oh, it's arthritis. And all of a sudden we find like, no, it's tissue that's tight. Once we release that tissue, we work on building the strength back up again, then your joint pain goes away. So that's number two, is you can have soft tissue tightness that is tight around the joint. Now, the third thing is when you get fibrotic tissue or degenerative tissue. This happens as we get older. It also happens when we have injuries, because what happens is the body stopped healing and the tissue became more fibrotic. It happened to me on my left hip, my right knee, so bad. I did Shockwave on it, and it felt amazing that now my hip that has been taking the load for probably 10, 15 years is saying like, okay, now you get to focus on me. A lot of fibrotic tissue. Didn't matter how much soft tissue I did, how much stretching I did. It didn't matter. Like, I had to actually do Shockwave to reduce the fibrotic tissue, the degenerative tissue. That's the solution. So that's one of the reasons why we have brought Shockwave, regenerative Shockwave, into our practice, because it does amazing things to our tissues. And when our tissues lack that blood supply, because it's become more fibrotic, because there's more scarring, because it's become more degenerative, that means there's just not a blood supply there anymore. So the tissue's not flexible, and it pulls on the joint, and it doesn't feel good. It makes you feel like you have arthritis, but it's really not, because if we can get the blood flow back into those areas, revascularizing those areas with Shockwave, the Shockwave technology, it makes the tissue young again. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I feel lighter. Actually, I can actually stretch and move. And that's what Shockwave does. And that's why we've integrated it into our practice, because we're getting amazing results. So those are the three things that we look at that we can totally solve. And most of the time when people have stiffness, they fall into one of these three categories. So if we can solve whichever category they're in with our evaluation, they feel amazing. It makes them literally feel younger. You could be 60 years old. We have people that are 80 years old that literally thought that that's just what they're gonna have to live with, and they're just gonna have to live in their rocking chair, and they're just gonna have to be, you know, in in their recliner, and that's how they're gonna have to live because they hurt, because they're so stiff. And in reality, they're doing amazing. We've been able to give them 10, 15 years of life where they feel younger. That's what we do. If you want to feel younger as you age, then we're the office for you. That's what we do. That's how we help people in being able to continue to travel and feel great and play with their kids, play with their grandkids. It is possible. We see it every day in our office. So if you know someone who is frustrated with their stiffness as they move and are fearful of what their mobility and independence will look like in the future, we'd love to help them make a better decision. Comment and tell us what's going on, and we'll walk you through the best way to connect them with us, even by email introduction if that's easiest for you. You can also connect us in the description where you can sign up for a free discovery visit so we can learn more about you and help you start the process of making a better decision. You don't have to go through unnecessary surgery or wasted time in therapy. We can help you find the real source of your problem and get you back to doing what you love without injections, medications, or surgery. And don't forget, subscribe or hit the bell as we put out content almost daily on this channel. And if you want to feel 40 when you get to the age of 60, then this is the channel for you.